Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Breakthrough Code Show. I'm really excited to have you here, and I'm so excited to introduce you to our guest. His name is Zak Williams, and he is the son of Robin Williams. His dad was amazing. His dad did so much great work. He made us laugh. He entertained us. But this young man is doing just as incredible work, and so I'm super excited to have you here, Zak. We're going to get into your work in just a minute, but thanks for being on the show.
Thanks. Really awesome to be here today. Thank you.
Yeah. So you are doing incredible work in the field of mental health, and many people know the story of your dad, who was, we all thought was such a happy and fun guy because that's the way we saw him. But he passed away a few years ago, and through the struggles you had, you realized, through seeing your dad, but also the struggles with your mental health, that you could make an impact on the world, and you're doing that now. Can you take us through how that came about?
Sure. Yeah. Well, after my father died by suicide, what happened within me was that I was experiencing a lot of dysregulation. I was diagnosed with complex post-traumatic stress disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, and depression. And I was doing a bunch of unhealthy things to seek to manage those diagnoses. I was self-medicating using alcohol. I was eating to excess. I was isolating from friends, family, pretty much everybody.
Yeah.
And I realized something had to give. I could either continue living in that way and have a slow degradation of the quality of my life until who knows, or decide to take a stand and discover ways to heal. And what ultimately I discovered was a commitment to service was the start of my path to healing. What I discovered after that was if you commit to service, you need to take care of yourself.
Yeah.
And if you don't take care of yourself, and I had a lot of resistance around self-care and so forth because I thought it was selfish and self-centered.
I think so many people think that too, so I'm glad you're bringing this up.
Yeah, for me, I didn't conflate self-love as a path to best being of service.
Yeah.
And when I started to make those connections, I realized a couple of things. A, I had to cut out the drinking. It was poisoning me.
Yeah.
B, I had to find lifestyle solutions that enabled me to be buttressed, to have a foundation that supported me in better being of service, because ultimately service is my path to happiness.
Yeah. But making sure you take care of yourself, that just like on the airplane, right? Put your mask on yourself before you help others. And we forget that, we have something in common. My dad passed away. I was killed in Vietnam. So it was something that happened very quickly, right? But he was away for 11 months, and I still remember looking out the window. I was only 3 years old, but I still have a vivid memory of looking out the window of my bedroom one morning, seeing a taxi cab pull up. Army officer gets out, comes to the front door to tell my mom my dad was killed in Vietnam. The day before, I remember her scream, people coming in the house. I had 2 little brothers. I was 3, I had a 2-year-old, a 6-month-old. And for years, now I know what was happening, but for years, I was stuck in grief. I had tremendous fear, anxiety, all those things. And I realized I had PTSD too. So this is something I think so many people face without really understanding it.
Yeah, I think culturally speaking, at least in terms of how I thought about things when I was growing up, was that PTSD is reserved for people who are deployed in active military theaters. And yes, the rates of PTSD for people who are deployed is massive. But if you're looking at the traumas we experience over the course of our lives, whether it's with family interaction or violence or isolation that occurs over long periods of time due to any number of reasons, PTSD manifests all throughout society in so many different ways. And what we need to understand is it's a coping mechanism.
Yeah.
Often, we manifest symptoms of PTSD as a form of defense.
Yeah.
The thing is, in many ways, it can get us through certain stages, but then it becomes terribly unproductive over time.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the mind's always trying to protect us, but sometimes it's not aware enough of what's a better option. And that's what I love what you're doing. Now, the cool thing is people like you, and you had Michael Phelps come out a few years ago saying how he suffered from depression, and we all looked at him like, how could he be depressed? He's this all-time gold medal winner champion. Like, how could he have been Simone Biles in the last Olympics? And so it's a beautiful thing now that people are coming out, and it's okay, right? It's okay to have it. And it's harder for people to understand it, because it's not like they can look at you and go, your arm's broken, or it's a hidden thing, but it's coming out more now, which is so empowering, I think, for people.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Another consideration is our use of language and definitions. I think, at least from my experience in speaking with older generations, what I found is that mental health dysregulation, mental health issues as a term instead is replaced with stressful work environment, financial duress, a breakup, relationship issues, things like that, versus saying, hey, this is a mental health challenge. And I think younger generations, Generation Z, millennials to some respect, definitely the generation, the youngest generation, they're discussing their mental health because it's a direct way of addressing the stigma and biases associated with it.
Yeah.
If you're talking about financial challenges or relationship issues or, different type of stresses, sometimes it can lead to skirting around the relationship it has to your physiological state.
Yeah.
That it causes anxiety, that it causes depression. Often we gloss a lot of that over in favor of, hey, I'm going through this specific thing. There's a set of solutions that are required to solve it, and then I'll be fixed. But there's a lasting remnant to a lot of that we need to call out and specifically address our biases around.
Yeah. And then it's not addressed, the mental issues, it can even affect the physical body, right? Because you're depressing the immune system, the body's more susceptible to infections, chronic disease. So it's so important. And yet I saw an article where you said that mental health is only 2.5%, I think, of the medical spend.
It depends on how you qualify it.
Yeah.
I would amend that number.
Okay.
Based upon adding behavioral health, mental health, allocation of medical GDP expenditure. And in the U.S., the number is around 5.5%.
Okay, but you said it should be 70.
We should be 15% to 17%.
Okay.
Yeah, we should be 3x where we are right now. It's improving slower than we need it to.
Yeah.
And if we're looking at where we are in the United States versus the rest of the world, in Australia, it's now about 7.5%. In New Zealand, it's around 9%.
Wow.
Other parts of the world, it's less than where we are in the U.S. But really, if we're looking at the state of care, both here and abroad, we're not near where we need to be to provide comprehensive solutions.
Yeah. So what do you tell people, like when I was growing up and I was having anxiety and fear and things like that, and not that people told me, but I was in an environment around a military base where, you got to be tough, right? You got to, it's down in there, but, show on the outside that you're strong, that you got it together. How do people overcome that stigma that if you express that you have issues like anxiety, that you're weak, you're not fit, you're not up to it? Like, what do you suggest? How do we start to look at it differently?
Well, I think it's important to explore the relationship between vulnerability and resilience.
Okay, cool.
Historically speaking, amongst groups of men, and this is not the case universally, but I'd say in the Western context, often vulnerability has been conflated with weakness.
Yeah.
You are exposing yourself, therefore you are can be subject to harm, can be subject to ridicule, can be subject to being weak.
Yeah.
The thing is that I've found, there's, at least in my personal experience and when I speak to other advocates, people in the clinical world and so forth, is that if you can find inner resilience, that in turn is incredibly empowering, because then you can be vulnerable without feeling like you're exposing yourself.
Yeah.
So, amongst groups of men, there is, I would say, amongst younger men, there is a culture of finding opportunities to be more vulnerable, being more open. But I think we need to think about going hand in hand with that as opportunities to build more resilience, both in terms of our minds, but also our bodies. And there's a bunch of reasons for that. But if we're looking at the stigma within, groups of men, often I think it's very fear-based.
Yeah, for sure.
And there are ways to change that. There are evidence-backed ways to change that as well. Often, people respond very dynamically to peer-to-peer support. If they talk to mentors, people with lived experience. From a socio-medical standpoint, it's shown to have significant outcomes in terms of people being able to have, better life trajectories, potentially have their mental health issues, whether it's anxiety, depression, or serious mental illness, better managed, not fall into addiction in the same way due to not feeling as isolated. One thing's very clear to me is the lived experience consideration. Vulnerability enables us to share our lived experience, which in turn establishes a beacon.
Yeah.
And then we can draw other people in to engage around dialogue and discourse with. And this is a bipartisan consideration. It's apolitical.
Yeah.
This enables us to really find opportunities for synthesis and healing and meaningful discussion.
Yeah. To me, I think, the way I look at vulnerability now, because I used to be really afraid of it. Even when I was, in my 20s and I was leading, I was, head of sales and marketing for a company. I couldn't go ask anybody, what do you think about this idea? Or I don't quite know what to do here. Can you give me an idea? Because that was weak, right? I had it all wrong. I had to have all the answers. I had to be perfect. I had to know everything. And it's such a sham, and now what I learned is being vulnerable is the ultimate strength, right? Because you're not trying to put something up, this fake thing up in front of you. You're just being super open. And that's incredibly empowering.
I couldn't agree with you more. But if you look at it in the context of business, there's something fascinating that happens when you find opportunities to be vulnerable. It's not good in every context. But if you're looking at opportunities where you have ways in which you can share your experience, share your thought patterns, your processes, it enables rapid iteration.
Yeah.
It actually catalyzes innovation.
Yeah.
And if you are able to be resilient in terms of accepting feedback, accepting understanding of where there are opportunities to further invest in yourself around.
Yeah.
In the private sector, that's a superpower.
Yeah.
But the caveat of that is, often if we don't establish resilient systems that have positive feedback loops or feedback loops that can lead to positive outcomes, what can end up happening is very stratified structures can be prone to collapse or breakdown.
Yeah.
And that happens in the natural world, that happens in the business sector, and resilience is everywhere around you. And the most resilient systems are those that are most survivable.
Yeah. Well, you've got such a great platform. So many people knew your dad, and now you're continuing to really honor his legacy by helping so many people. You could have hidden and not been vulnerable, but you're coming out and just helping so many people. So this is the Breakthrough Coach Show. So we want to talk about how do we become more resilient? And I know you've got education programs. You've got some amazing supplements. I just took one right before we got on air, and I feel amazing right now. That's great. Michelle knows in just a minute. But take us through because I know there's several factors, and then we'll even talk about maybe what's coming up in AI and machine learning, but start with the basics. How do we become more resilient so that we can be happier and healthier and more vibrant and joyful? What are some things we can do, even if we're not feeling great right now?
Well, for me, it started really starting to understand the process of building resilience started with my habits. What I started to realize is that my lifestyle was not conducive to building resilience. I started looking at my nutrition, my fitness regimens, mindfulness, meditation, therapy, community support habits, more specialist interventions like my relationship with breath work and intermittent fasting. And a large part of this is due to my wife, Olivia June, who had a severe... Yes, she is. That one lady. And she had a traumatic experience in her teens. When she was in her teens, her sister died by suicide. And she spent over 2 decades establishing a path to healing around building out solutions for herself, grounded in nutrition, but also looking at how she thinks about fitness and mindfulness. And when I was going through some of my darkest times and we were friends, she actually turned me on to the whole idea that you can establish better habits, and those in turn will lead to better outcomes and just living life in a happier way. And so,
have you ever heard the quote that first you build your habits, then your habits build you?
I have not, but I feel like I need to be reciting that every day. And so what we started looking at was the systems that made up our mental health hygiene rituals, and started understanding what worked best for us. And so I realized with nutrition, I had, when I took alcohol out of the equation, I was abusing sugar. Right? No, I mean, I was drawn towards sugar.
Replacement addiction.
Right, exactly, right? And that actually has a very dysregulative effect. I was not getting the appropriate spectrum of nutrients I needed, and I wasn't establishing supplementation in a specific way that was helping me. The reason why I talk about supplementation specifically is because often in the Western diet, you're not finding concentrated nutrition, whether there's psychobiotics or methylated vitamins or specific types of amino acids and so forth. You're not finding them in strong enough concentrations to have.
Most people are eating processed food.
Yeah, exactly.
There's no real vitamins.
Yeah, you're not getting the best nutritional foundation, so it can lead to deficiencies. I had several deficiencies.
Well, you said even with your neurotransmitters, right?
Yeah, so I later learned that the majority of Americans have neurotransmitter deficiencies, but in large...
Everybody listening to this, the majority of us have the same issues.
Well, if you look at what's under our hood, right, we're not eating in the way that we should. There are certain things relating to lifestyle and environmental toxicity that can contribute to deficiencies or overages. But if you're looking at the definition of the neurotransmitter systems, which is, at this point, it's like the GABA system, the serotonin system, the catecholamine system, which is like dopamine, adrenaline, endorphins. I believe oxytocin. Among, and then as an adjunct to that, our hormone system, which is very interrelated. But if you look at it on a whole, nutrition plays a large part in that, but also things like fitness, essential for endorphins, human connection, essential for oxytocin, and then expanding beyond that, mindfulness, incredible opportunities to start to find daily ways to ground myself was something that was transformational for me. And starting every day with a gratitude ritual.
And you do that, right?
Yeah.
So tell us, what is your gratitude ritual?
It's very easy. List four things that I'm grateful of.
Every morning?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. You can just do this and you can just recite them.
What are you grateful for today?
My family, my friends, the opportunity to be of service, and the lifestyle that enables me to be of service.
Awesome. Yeah. Just by listing those and really thinking about those for a minute, you start to generate more happiness, right?
Yeah, the resentment and frustration and the anxieties of day-to-day life is diminished.
Yeah.
Not saying it's completely washed away, but it certainly is diminished. Meditation, essential part. I know you know a ton about that.
Yeah.
But if we look at how meditation fundamentally reconfigures our mind and ultimately leads to evidence-backed outcomes relating to our body, I mean, the sky's the limit in terms of how deeply meditation can impact us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it lights up different parts of our brain, and I practiced meditation for a long time. I know you're going to take TM, yeah, which is very evidence-based, by the way. Like, they've really researched that, and I know, like, Jerry Seinfeld, I think, even pays for people like scholarships to take that, because he's been doing it his whole life. He told me a funny story back when I took it, where actually not the first time I took it, but recently I did like a little refresher where he thought you're only supposed to do it like once a day, right? So he was getting great benefits for once a day, and they, you do it twice a day. Oh, it's even better.
Yeah. I mean, I'm very looking forward to diving in further there. Expanding beyond that, if you're looking at things like therapy, I think, as a culture, sometimes therapy as a specific healing modality is challenging for some people. Mm-hmm. Sometimes what I hear is, I've gone through several therapists and I just didn't find the right fit. And in my case, sometimes it was challenging.
Yeah.
What I found is really helpful is finding folks with lived experience or the context.
To an lived experience, I mean, people that have gone through similar things?
Potentially similar things.
Like, because I was reading where you were saying, like, on the suicide hotline, when you really got into researching it, like, if a veteran's calling, then ideally, not always, but, a veteran hopefully would be answering it that really understood what this person is going through, right?
That was actually the catalyst of the 988 initiative, is Congressman Seth Moulton, when he was traumatized through his deployment and so forth, he wanted to speak with people with similar experience so that he could find connection. He felt very isolated. And from my personal experience, I found therapy very helpful through certain times. What I'm hoping we can establish around around talk therapy, is a way in which people can find the right match.
Yeah.
I think there's a massive opportunity there, because sometimes people are turned off from therapy because they're like, it doesn't work for me and so forth. And I think I have a hunch it can work for a lot of people. They're just not finding the right fit out the gate.
Yeah.
So there's therapy. That's another one. Yeah. Community support. I'm very active in 12-step. That's important for me because the lived experience and an approach to managing things relating to my self-medication and addiction is essential. And also, there's community support solutions all throughout the world that people can apply towards finding meaningful connection, seeking to stave off isolation. Yeah. Friends are a part of the community support.
Olivia started a whole company around this.
She did, yeah, Vina. And so, there's a community support element. And then if you're looking at specialized solutions, whether it's breath work, which is incredible for supporting, the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems, and helping alleviate issues relating to anxiousness and supporting sleep in many different ways. I think it's helpful in most ways, or at least helpful for most people.
Yeah.
When it comes to breath work.
So I have a couple of questions. First of all, if you go back to when you were in the midst of all this and you compare yourself to now, it's night and day, I'm sure, right? Like, it's even hard to imagine where you were way back when you were self-medicating and doing all that. It's so much better now, correct?
Yeah, I mean, every day for me was one I was gritting my teeth through.
Yeah.
This was even before my father passed away.
Yeah. And then that just probably exacerbated, right?
Yeah, it certainly magnified over time. Yeah. But I when I started finding paths to healing, I realized that the way in which I was living life was completely unnecessary.
Yeah.
Why was I subjecting myself to so much anguish and pain?
Yeah.
When there were simple ways to approach living life meaningfully, happy, in a straightforward manner. Yeah. That didn't come overnight, and there's still a lot of learning to do. I see myself as
I'm 62 years old. I know I better be learning. I'm learning from you today, and I want to be learning tomorrow. And I don't think we're ever finished project. And I have a process where in the breakthrough code we talk about letting go of old baggage, right? Letting go and not, having it crammed up in us. And pretty much every day I'm like, I'll get like a little feeling like, wait, something doesn't feel quite right. I go back in. What's in there? What do we need to get out? What trauma? What belief system, whatever it might be. But when you're in the midst of really the darkest days, because some people are right now, most people probably listening aren't, right? But they may know someone who is, and they may have a time when they are. How do you motivate yourself to make that shift, right? Because your momentum is taking you a certain way, and you have to start to go against momentum.
Yeah, well, it's a great question, and it might not always start with lifestyle changes.
Yeah.
In the U.S., we're very much oriented around crisis care solutions.
Yeah. So it gets to a crisis, and then all of a sudden,
yeah, and often, for many people, that starts their path to healing. But when you talk about crisis, really, it's about stabilization first, and then starting to look at the way in which you can establish more of an integrated care solution.
Yeah.
I think as a culture, there is positive progress around actually looking at integrative care.
Yeah.
Where it gets challenging is, as a crisis solution, you're given a prescription. You're institutionalized or put on, crisis hold, 5150 or so forth. And, after that, then you're just released back.
Thrown out.
And
it's because it didn't solve the problem. It maybe treated some symptoms or kept you safe for a little while, but you still have those issues inside that need to be helped.
It might have staunched the wound.
Yeah.
But we're not looking at the activity that ultimately won't lead us to getting wounded again.
Right.
And, I think the set of solutions that we've established around crisis care, the reason why those systems are getting overwhelmed is that we haven't started looking at prevention as a primary mode of support.
Yeah.
And so, in speaking all throughout the country now, what I found time and time again is that systems, especially those relating to frontline healthcare providers and so forth, are being entirely overwhelmed through, what's going on with opioids and, this addiction crisis, through everything that's going on with the dysregulation people are feeling through prolonged isolation, through potential market corrections, recessions, and so forth. And so, we really need to start looking at the system holistically and saying, what is it that we're doing that is letting, our populations be unsupported through times of crisis, or insufficiently supported.
And I think one of the other things that's really important to tell people is, as you start to move in a different direction, you need to be patient. Like, we're such a instant gratification crave society. We want, okay, I'll do what he said, but it better work quick or I'm not going to believe in it. But if you look at your path, it wasn't like the next day, all of a sudden, hallelujah, I'm better. It was probably incremental improvement, learning, maybe even a step back every now and then. And talk to us about that aspect of it too.
Well, I'm, like many people, prone to instant gratification.
We all want.
Yeah. But for me, the process took several years, but I had to establish incremental change. Just to say, hey, find your mental hygiene rituals, change nutrition, fitness, mindfulness, meditation, therapy, community support, and so forth overnight. It doesn't, that's overwhelming
because it's making a change inside of who you are, right? That takes time. It took time to get to where we are now, and it takes time to get to where we need to go to to that next level.
Yeah. Where I think, a good starting point is a willingness to change.
Yeah.
And also an opportunity to really tell oneself, hey, I'm worth it.
Yeah. I love that. I'm worth it.
Yeah. And it can be really challenging because sometimes self-esteem is an issue.
Sure.
Self-medicating using alcohol or drugs or food or what have you can lead to self-esteem issues. And, in part, sometimes we need to see, hey, it's not just about being dysregulated, potentially out on the street or in a state of psychosis. That's crisis. We need to actually start identifying crisis earlier on. Say, hey, this is not sustainable. We need to ask ourselves, are we happy? Are we living a fulfilled life? And if not, what small steps can we do towards the right direction?
Yeah. And sometimes that even includes hanging out with different people, right? Not the same group that kind of draws you into some of those things, finding a different crowd to hang out with. Hey, let's talk about AI.
Sure.
And machine learning, because I read a book years ago. Actually, Tony Robbins gave me the book, The Age of Spiritual Machines. It was talking about the merging of technology and humanity, and with a very positive spin on it, it could make us more spiritual, right? But what's going on with AI and machine learning in terms of mental health?
Well, there's several things happening. Most recently, and you'll see in the news things like ChatGPT.
Yep. Everyone's helping it. You can't even get on now, right? So you go get it.
And so now there's experiments being conducted around how ChatGPT functions as, a therapeutic solution.
Really? It can be a therapist?
Yeah, through text, right?
Wow.
And, there's now these experiments and
That's amazing.
There's interesting positive outcomes. There's some negative aspects to it.
Yeah.
Ultimately, if we're looking at how establishing learning around large language models, say that 10 times fast, can lead to innovative experiences. I'm reasonably optimistic around it, but the challenge with that is that it doesn't enable a high-touch interpersonal experience. It certainly doesn't enable a lived experience. It's actually the anathema to a lived experience. And so, I think there's certain challenges associated with that. That said, I think, in terms of a check-in basis, in terms of an analysis or intake basis, on a diagnostic basis, I think it can actually be quite uniquely valuable. Because imagine a customized diagnostic that can have an output that goes beyond quantitative. It can be a qualitative output that in turn can be reviewed by a therapist or a psychiatrist. That's valuable.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's a tech extender that enables one psychiatrist to manage more people than he or she otherwise would be able to.
That's interesting you just said that, because I've had several conversations around business people that are really concerned, is this going to replace me? But you're saying it can make you more efficient. Now a therapist can help more people because it's almost like having a few assistants there doing the pre-work.
Yeah, any single one of these innovations has two sides or is multifaceted. I think where I'm particularly excited about AI and machine learning is around the analysis, around the anomaly detection. There's some wonderful companies out there. I'll give an example. Ellipsis Health has established a voice diagnostic that can occur during a session that can identify when someone is potentially depressed, when they're experiencing dysregulation and so forth. Let's hope we can apply these for good and altruistic means, because there are
Could be manipulative too.
it can be manipulative, and there can be very unique applications, and also relates upon the training environment.
Right.
You can get false positives and false negatives based upon the type of data. Yeah. So, the way in which we need to approach innovation in AI and machine learning is really looking at the user experience, looking at tech enablement. How does this augment humans? I think that's an essential element of it. And then what the data environment looks like. Is this clean data? Is this data that's ultimately worth analyzing?
Right.
Is this data that can ultimately help us discover, a diagnosis more efficiently? Can it lead us to a treatment pathway in, a cost-efficient way? So there's massive opportunities. I personally am extremely excited about the opportunity to match lifestyle data.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, my entire regimen, my mental hygiene, all of that, and then combine that with, the evaluative process associated with the DSM model, and then from there, take my biomarkers. Mm-hmm. If you had a learning model associated with analyzing all of that, you could determine some really interesting, unique outcomes. Of course, it's not just my data. You need thousands. You need, potentially hundreds of thousands, millions of people analyzed, their data analyzed in a de-identified, HIPAA-compliant way, so that you can then understand, hey, when you're doing this and you're taking this, like a medication and so forth, it can lead to the probability of this happening. But we would know far more about it if we had the metabolomics, if we had the lifestyle and everything associated with, and the data associated with it matched to the DSM model.
Yeah, that's awesome. Let's talk about your company. So
sure.
Your company is actually your middle name, PYM, which your dad gave you because he said it sounded Welsh. Is that what it?
Yeah.
But the company, so it's pym.com is your website.
Yep, pym.com.
Yeah, but it's prepare your mind, right? So you used your middle name, but you came up with a really cool way of using it. And so you brought two things here today for us. And I took the mood chews, which are amazing. It says support for stress, worry, or overwhelm. I'm not sure I was stressed, worried, or overwhelmed, but I sure feel better now after taking it. So talk to us about your company and some of the things that you have for people.
Yeah, so in creating the company, my wife Olivia and I, who is the co-founder, wanted to create a brand that stood for mental health advocacy, like Patagonia stands for sustainability.
Love that.
Or Starbucks stands for coffee. Mm-hmm. We wanted to give back to mental health initiatives with a portion of proceeds. Oh. And we wanted to make nutrition for mental well-being a household thing. Because what we started learning more and more about through our journeys was that nutrition can be decisively helpful for people in a safe, evidence-backed, natural way.
Yeah.
Right? And I was very skeptical of how nutrition could support my mental well-being. And after going through this windy rabbit hole over a period of years around it, I discovered that for me, I could find the foundation I needed. And when it came to creating our brand, really what it was about catalyzing lifestyle solutions for mental health. So it's not just about the nutrition.
Right.
If we can succeed in getting someone to learn about their mental hygiene solutions around what they need to do to take care of themselves from a lifestyle perspective, and they don't end up taking our products, we would deem ourselves successful.
That's beautiful.
Really what matters is that we can use private sector activity and effective evidence-backed solutions to catalyze change in people. So we're seeing it as an opportunity to get people to think more mindfully around their mental health.
And they're chewables. It tastes really good, right? And you were saying because they are chewables in the way that they're made, they actually are absorbed by the body much quicker. So,
well, it depends. Yeah. So we formulate each product specifically with bioavailability in mind.
Okay.
We have the chews, so the mood chews and our attention chew, which are focused on the mood chews specifically on stress, overwhelm, so forth.
Everybody needs that.
Yeah,
and at some point,
it's totally
day or week. Yeah.
And the attention chews on things like distraction and energy and so forth. We formulated those so that they could be best bioavailable as bioavailable as they could be.
Yeah.
Right?
Awesome.
We launched something called the Mental Hygiene Kit, which is set up with 4 products, which is a magnesium 3 and 8.
Actually,
Yeah, what's a magnesium stack
yeah.
with amino fortification
Okay, cool.
for restful calm.
Yeah.
That's a powder
Oh, okay.
because it's helpful in a powder form. And, combining that with sustainable fatty acids, those are gels.
Yeah.
And psychobiotics, those are pills.
Yeah.
Psychobiotics are probiotics and prebiotics to support the gut-brain connection.
Awesome. And people can find out more about this on ym.com.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, it's been amazing having you here. You're just such a wonderful being who's bringing light to so many people. What is your hope for the future in closing us out here for mental health? What do you hope to see as we move forward 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now?
Tom, I hope we can have a world where our children, our future generations can feel like they're supported, heard, and have the solutions that work well for them in a safe, effective, loving environment.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Tom.